I'm starting to come to the understanding that this physical matrix dream world that's best described as a hologram. So if you're connected to the hologram concept of this physical world, you're definitely resonating with some, in my opinion, very accurate information. But the hologram has to have certain things, oftentimes behind the scenes, operating to maintain it. Us people would see as something far from the future or something magical, but it's technology that sustains this hologram. And you could even say that that technology is neutral. The magnetic field has something to do with how the hologram of what we call 3D physical Earth world, whatever you believe the shape of the Earth is, or whatever your perception of time is, whatever your perception of the afterlife is, it's a hologram. A hologram. And the magnetic field has a significant impact on the hologram's ability to exist, to be function, to sustain itself, to be able to manifest. So regular physical Earth life would not look anything or be anything like it is now if, let's say, the magnetic field collapsed or got so weak that it was not not registering much at all. And those of you out there know, some of you know that, and others have heard, but you can do the research and see that, yeah, the magnetic field is weakening. Now, it depends on what you're looking at specifically and what you're figuring out about it, but you'll see there's an acceleration of the weakening. It's getting weaker faster. And then one of the things I wanted to tell you today is that if the magnetic field gets too weak, the matrix starts to get glitchy. Mandela effect being a huge glitch in the matrix. If you believe that the cause of the Mandela effect has to do with what might be said called evil forces, whether you're going to say it, whether you think it might be CERN or nefarious time travelers or AI, or you can go on and on, but that is programming. If the fear and your concern, worry, and anxiety over those things is programming. It's been put into you. It's not part of your natural state of being. So when you have those fear-based thoughts and feelings, and I'm not saying anything against anyone who has those thoughts and feelings. I'm not saying that anybody is better than anyone else, because we are all one. There is not. That is the most fundamental thing I became aware of when I awakened in the late 90s. That we are all one it's as literal can be. Everything is part of the same one. Once you get to a certain perspective beyond human comprehension. But yes, so when I talk about good and evil being a human perspective, you needing a person to be able to discern and judge and make a decision on if their perception is it's good or evil. That good and evil are perception of the human, and actually there really is no good or evil. And everything ultimately is part of one. There's one, words are limiting, but one creation, and everything is part of it. Nothing is not part of it. And the human experience is very multifaceted. There's so much to it, the human experience. And part of the human experience is to exist in a form that is able to forget its true identity, eternal, all-knowing. I mean, most people's concept of God, that's what everything is. Everything is God. All is one. There is nothing that's not God. So, but we forgot that. We're in a human form. This version of Earth and these versions of avatar bodies. Our bodies are avatars. Our consciousness uses it. Watch the movie Avatar. It's super interesting. There's a reason it's the -- most watched movie, or at least for amount of ticket sales ever as of 2019. So these human being avatar bodies, our consciousness, our true consciousness, our innate nature, your soul, your spirit, the real you. One of the best ways I can describe it, that's using more of an analogy than words, even though I have to use words to describe it, right? But an analogy would be whatever that part of you that understands that it's real. Some people refer to that as the I am, or the I am presence. So that I am, that part of you that knows you're real, that you exist, that's connected to whatever the real you is. A lot of people will call it a soul. So yes, the soul picks these versions of expression in this dense consciousness level, intending to forget your true nature. So you come into these bodies intending to forget your true nature. Now, there are those out there that have come to a realization that this is a prison planet for souls, and souls get trapped and recycled, and your memory gets wiped. All right, that is accurate information from my understanding. That is true. I'm not trying to say it's not, but there are different perceptions of what's going on here, and that's a perception from what you might call a soul's perspective, and the perception and experience is the recycled reincarnation energy vampire, the vampire, the controlled system, the net, Archons, and all that stuff, AI. Yes. I know. The same place can have a soul can have a perception that it's a unique, diverse experience opportunity where you get to experience certain emotions that are just not accessible when you don't get to this level of denseness. Down here in this dense place we're in, not saying it's bad, just saying it's dense. Down here in this dense place, our souls come into these avatars that are in this form. It's a human on this version of Earth, where it's possible to experience emotions and feelings that are not accessible normally in almost all the rest of creation. So that you could call that a perk or a draw. There are beings that come into these human body avatars that are not susceptible to being caught in this net, whether that's a metaphor or literal, the net, and the souls that are being recycled. There are beings that are in bodies that it's not applicable to. And the perspective and perception of those beings who come into some of these bodies is not that of you don't have a choice, your memory's getting wiped, you're trapped. So people who perceive that they're in a cycle of reincarnation against their will, and their memories being wiped against their will, and though people who have that perception of this reincarnation reality that we go through, a lot of us go through, that's that your consciousness will expand, your perception will widen, your awareness will increase, and eventually, over time, gaining experience and wisdom, those things happen as a side effect. You'll eventually you're likely to see the same thing this Earth reincarnation setup is not a trap. It's similar to waking up from a nightmare. And when you're asleep at night and you're dreaming and you have a nightmare, and it's a very negative place to be in, and you feel trapped, and then you wake up and you realize, okay, that wasn't even real. Whew, and it was short. So, but in the dream, it seemed like everything. So that's a way to connect the dots a little bit on that. But there's people who I don't know how else to say it, but work for aliens that do not have humans' best interest in mind. And this small group of humans that work for these aliens, these negative aliens, they have historically infiltrated a lot of society and have shaped things quite a bit. We're finally breaking out of that cycle. People every day are becoming more and more aware of what's going on, and there's a global awakening happening, and it's happening quickly. Sometimes it's not readily apparent, but it is. If you're interested in supernatural things, if you're interested in AI, if you're interested in things that are from other worlds, you might want to check out Black Goo. It's very, very unique. There's nothing even similar to it in all of the world. Nothing similar to it. Black Goo. I don't know enough about that topic to really speak much upon it. One thing I don't do is just start blabbering about whatever, unless it's a very informal, transparent pondering and speculation. But Black Goo, I'll talk about it after I've gained enough insight and knowledge and experience with connecting to that concept of Black Goo. But you should look into it. It's super interesting. Way back in 2016, that was about a year after I started making videos on this platform. 2016, I was talking about the timelines, and there are certain timelines that are moving in what we would perceive as a positive direction, and with an actual outcome of some form of world peace. And there were timelines where it would be the opposite. I'm just going to leave it at that, okay? Opposite of that. So it's not as cut and dry as that, because there's so many shades of gray, right? But there's a general consensus of timelines that are moving in a quote-unquote positive direction, and a general consensus of timelines moving in a negative direction. And I explained how your feelings and thoughts, and to a lesser extent your intentions, were going to adjust, change, and shift you through the different timelines. And you want to be on one side of the fence, not the other. I didn't use the fence analogy, but that's what I was talking about. So you want to be on the side of the fence that's going to end up with approximately half of the timelines. I use that word half loosely because there's really an infinite amount of timelines. So what is half of infinity? Infinity, right? That's a whole other topic. We can talk about infinity in a minute. Just hold on. Hold that thought. Hold that thought. So you want to be on the side of the fence that's heading to a good timeline. The analogy is like trains and train tracks. You want to be on one of the trains that's going to end up in world peace, not what I'm just going to call the opposite. Okay, so and I explained how your thoughts and feelings were going to have a big say in which train you end up riding. Okay, the fear being one of the main things that was going to be problematic. So it's 2019 now. In 2016, I became aware of the urgency to get that message out, the importance of not being afraid, and that at the very least, Mandela effect shifts is a good sign. It's showing something that has to do with changes in a positive direction, and or human consciousness evolving. Imagine there was a clock on the wall, a real big clock. It had the hour hand, the minute hand, the second hand. Now the second hand was able to move in, it was moving very, very quickly, and it was doing 1/10 of a second ticks. So it ticked 10 times per second. The thing's going to town, right? But it's 10 times per second. So basically it's a 1/10 of a second hand, okay? So a big clock on the wall, and the hands actually can register 1/10 of a second, all right? If you can imagine that. All right, so a tenth of a second. If you were to somehow pause physical reality, if you could just pause the earth, if you've ever seen certain sci-fi shows or Twilight Zone episodes where somebody is able to pause reality and everyone freezes in place, the whole world, airplanes, everything. So if you could pause reality and it's just one frame, the whole universe, the whole damn universe, one frame, it's paused. We're going to call that, we're just going to put that aside. Now let's go back to our scene before we paused it, okay? Because reality was playing out. We paused reality. I don't want to use seconds on this analogy because too much can happen in 1 second. But a tenth of a second, just tiny, tiny changes happen. All right, so tenth of a second later. The first example, we paused reality at a certain point in time. Now, what we're going to do is pause reality, but this time we're going to pause it a tenth of a second, one little tick later, a tenth of a second later. So the first example, we paused it at one of the tick points. Now we're going to have the same version of reality play, and we're going to pause it. We're going to pause it at 1/10 of a second later. So now we have 2 frames of a movie. And it's an analogy. It's like 2 frames of a movie, right? And frame number 2 is slightly further ahead in what we would call time, right? So those 2 frames, the first one where we paused reality, somehow magically paused reality, and there was a certain time on the clock on the wall. Maybe it was 1:30, 1 hour, 30 minutes, and 35 seconds, and 2 ticks, 2/10. And now the second picture is 3/10. The second picture is 1/10 of a second later in time, and it's paused. So if you were waving to somebody, your hand was here in one of the pictures, it would be a tenth of a second further in the next picture. It would have moved just a tiny bit, right? The airplane in the sky would have moved just a little bit, in a tenth of a second. If you knocked a pen off a desk, it would just fall a little bit further in the air in a tenth of a second. Those 2 pictures would look very similar. What if you did it in 100th of a second? Now, all of a sudden, instead of 2 pictures in that tenth of a second, if you were doing them in 100ths of a second, you would have many, many, many pictures for each of those time frames. Now let's say instead of those pictures being 1/10 of a second apart, where there was barely any change in the 2 pictures, now the pictures are 1/100th of a second apart. So that's a literal fraction of a second. So now the 2 pictures are probably going to look identical, would they not? Right? 100th of a second. That's almost, from a human perspective, instantaneous. That means that let's say in 1 second, you would take a camera that took 100 pictures of somebody in 1 second. Even if that person was like turning their head to look at you, it would take 100 pictures for their head to start in one direction to get to the other. It would look, and the 2 pictures next to each other out of those 100, anywhere in that frame where the person is turning their head for a second, those 2 pictures out of the 100 that are right next to each other are going to look so identical. All right, so what I'm trying to say is, what if it was 1,000? You take 1,000 pictures of somebody who's like going to start looking in one direction and turn their head, and it takes a second. You took 1,000 pictures and looked at 2 of the pictures that were right next to each other out of 1,000, the ones right next to each other. There's going to be no perceptible difference, right? Eventually, you could use math and you could think about 1,000,000 pictures or 1,000,000,000 pictures per second, and how those 2 frames next to each other would not look any different. So you've paused. You press the pause button on reality. Okay. Now this is a close approximation to how human beings actually move forward through time from the perspective of a human being living in this holographic matrix we call physical 3D world, Earth, reality, or whatever you call it. You have these frozen universes. You could cut it down to 1,000 in a second, so you have all these still frames, these frozen 3D universes that are all frozen in time. And each frozen universe, the clock on the wall that ticks really fast has a slightly different orientation. You don't actually move forward in time because there is no time. Time does not move forward. There's no past, no future. There's only the present. There's only the eternal now. There's only the present. And reality basically creates itself over and over again, countless times per what you would call second. So there's no future, no past. But there's a human perception of time, and this helps explain that. You also don't move through space. When you're asleep at night and you're dreaming, you're having a dream, you're in your bed and you're not moving, and you're dreaming that you're running around, your physical body's not moving. Okay? Well, in this awake world, this physical world, when you're awake and you're in your normal reality, you're not moving either. Because this, to a perspective of a more real version of you, just like the person in the bed is a more real version than the dream version, right? So there's these different avatar levels. So anyway, you're not actually moving. Nobody moves. But yes, back to the analogy to help explain how humans move through time and space. You have the ability to, I will call it subconsciously, project your consciousness, your body, your awareness into all of these different frozen, paused physical universes. All these universes are paused. And you shift. You quantum jump. And you do that by moving from frozen, paused, forever physical universes, these paused, still frames of a movie, so to speak. You move from one to the next, to the next, to the next. So fast and so fluidly, it's like a movie projector and moving through a light and having motion picture. Pictures in motion. That's what it is. It's pictures in motion. Really. Nothing's actually moving. Your consciousness is popping in and out of these different, what you might call realities. These physical universes. But they're all still. Nothing actually moves. I know that probably sounds pretty out there for some of you, but I'm telling you, look into this. Follow the rabbit hole. All right, guys. I love you, and I'll see you again soon, all right? Try not to feel afraid. Find something that makes you feel excited. Joy, excitement. That's excitement. That's going to be your soul's way of communicating to you the path that your soul thinks you should take. Follow your excitement. Don't trust your mind, because a lot of people's minds have been compromised by those out not for your best interests. Sometimes your thoughts are not your own. Yes, follow your gut instinct, but sometimes you're blocked off from that. So then whatever excites you, do that. Move in that direction. If sailing around the world excites you and you know you can't do that right now because you got no money and no job, work on little things connected to that idea because it's exciting. Start the journey. Today's day one of getting ready to sail around the world. And it's exciting. So follow your excitement. All right, be good out there, guys.